The sky above Dry Ridge was the color of ash, and the wind carried the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Not just the weather kind. Emmett Rourke, once a proud rancher, now just a tired old man in a sun-faded coat, stood at the edge of the auction ring. Beside him, his horse, a purebred stallion named Dust Devil, shifted restlessly, sensing something was off. Emmett's face, lined deep by war, years of cattle work, and the grief of losing his wife, looked hollow. He wasn't here to sell the horse. At least, not willingly. But something, or someone, had forced his hand. The crowd had gathered early, buzzing with rumors. Dust Devil was legendary. $1 million animal, they whispered. Everyone wanted a piece of him. Buyers from all over the South, some whispering the name Cole Landry, a corporate rancher with a shady past and endless money. Emmett didn't care about any of it. All he had left was this horse, the last living thread tying him to his late wife, June. And as he tightened his grip on the reins, his knuckles turned white, from anger or fear, even he didn't know. Then came the screech of tires on gravel. 2 sheriff's cruisers tore through the dust, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Doors slammed. Boots hit dirt. And just like that, Sheriff Eli Banner and Deputy Travis Merle stepped out. The older lawman looked at Emmett like he was staring down a ghost. But there was no hesitation in his voice. "Emmett Rourke, you're under arrest for unlawful possession of registered livestock and document forgery." "Hands where I can see them." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emmett didn't move. His breath hitched, but he kept his head up, though his knees trembled under the weight of the accusation. People he'd known for 40 years turned their faces away. Even Virgil Tate, his neighbor and once friend, stood in silence. Emmett's hands were cuffed in front of everyone, and the betrayal burned worse than the steel biting into his wrists. And then, Dust Devil moved. The stallion tore the lead rope from the deputy's hand and bolted forward, placing himself between Emmett and the officers. The crowd panicked. The sheriff drew back. But the horse didn't charge. He stood firm, muscles tense, head high, eyes locked on his owner. It was like he knew, like he understood everything. Dust Devil wasn't just a horse. He was a witness. Deputy Merle's eyes darted between the horse, the crowd, and the paperwork in his hand. Something didn't add up. The signatures. The registration code. This wasn't just a bad ID, this was a setup. And yet, the cuffs stayed on. Emmett, silent and broken, stared past the crowd, past the sheriff, into the distance, wondering who had done this to him, and why. The walls of the county jail were colder than they looked. Not just cold from stone or steel, but cold in the way a man feels when everything he ever built crumbles in silence. Emmett Rourke sat on the edge of the metal cot, wrists sore, staring at the floor like it might offer him a reason. In 72 years, he had seen war, drought, and death, but nothing had ever stolen his breath like the feeling of betrayal that now filled his chest. Dust Devil had stood between him and the law, but the law had won anyway. And now, his silence was all he had left. On the other side of town, June Rourke, Emmett's daughter, was just finishing her shift at the hospital in Nashville when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. She hadn't spoken to her father in nearly 6 years. But something, some small instinct buried deep, made her swipe the screen. A deep voice crackled through the receiver. "Miss Rourke, your father's been arrested. You may want to come home." For a few seconds, she didn't breathe. She hadn't set foot in Dry Ridge since the funeral. Since they'd fought. Since she'd told him she never wanted to see him again. June sat in her car for a long time after the call ended. Hands shaking. Eyes wide. Emmett Rourke was many things. Stubborn, proud, even hard-hearted. But a criminal? Never. And yet, that voice had been real. The charges were real. Her heart pounded in her chest like it did back when she was a little girl, watching him ride Dust Devil across the fields at sunset. She'd tried so hard to forget that version of him, warm, present, human. But now the memories came rushing back, uninvited and too heavy to carry. Back at the sheriff's office, Deputy Travis Merle sat at his desk, flipping through the documentation. Something didn't sit right. The paperwork on Dust Devil looked clean, too clean. The registration was typed, not handwritten, with a signature that looked mechanical. He compared it to Emmett's signature on the booking form. Not even close. "Sheriff, you ever seen Rourke write like this?" he asked, but Sheriff Eli Banner just stared at the wall. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to," the old lawman muttered. But his eyes betrayed him. Something was eating at him too. Meanwhile, Cole Landry, the man everyone whispered about but no one confronted, poured himself a glass of bourbon in his office overlooking acres of stolen land. He stared at the news headline on his laptop, "Legendary Rancher Arrested in Shocking Auction Scandal." He smiled. "One less obstacle," he muttered. Dust Devil wasn't just a horse to Cole. He was a gold mine. And now, nothing stood in his way. Except maybe one daughter and a deputy who asked too many questions. Emmett stared at the barred window, a storm rolling in behind the clouds. Somewhere out there, someone had set a trap, and someone else was about to walk back into it. The highway to Dry Ridge hadn't changed. Long, cracked stretches of asphalt, telephone poles leaning like tired men, and fields that once smelled like childhood summers now felt dry and hollow. June Rourke drove with both hands clenched tight on the wheel, as if loosening her grip might let the pain flood back in. The sign welcoming her home appeared like a ghost in the dusk, Dry Ridge, home of champions. She hadn't been back since her mother's funeral, and as her father's weathered face replayed in her mind, she wondered if coming back now was a mistake, or something far overdue. She parked across from the sheriff's office as night crept over the town. Everything looked smaller than she remembered, the streets, the diner, even the sky. When she walked inside, Deputy Travis Merle looked up from behind the front desk. He recognized her instantly, not from photographs, but from the way her eyes held the same fire as the old man sitting in the back cell. "Miss Rourke," he said gently, standing. "I'm real sorry about what's happened." "He's back there. Quiet, mostly." She nodded once, her throat too tight for words. Emmett didn't stand when she entered the holding area. He just sat on the cot, head lowered, hands resting on his knees. June stood in silence for a moment, the air thick between them. "You look older," she said finally, her voice hoarse. He gave a dry chuckle. "That's what happens when your life gets taken from you one piece at a time." There was no warmth in his tone, no apology, no tears, just years of distance and unsaid things filling the room like fog. Outside, Deputy Merle returned to the paperwork. The more he read, the more things didn't line up. According to the transfer documents, Dust Devil had been signed over to a holding company, Sierra Valley Equine Holdings, just a week before the auction. Emmett's name was nowhere on the filing. But the signature used to authorize the transfer? It belonged to a man who hadn't been seen in Dry Ridge in over 3 years. Someone was using old ghosts to forge new crimes. At the Landry estate, Cole Landry was already 2 bourbons deep, leaning against the balcony as he watched the wind whip across the pasture. "Rourke's daughter's back," his assistant told him from the doorway. He didn't turn around. "Good. Let her dig. The deeper she goes, the worse it gets for him." His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. He had buried men with cleaner reputations than Emmett Rourke. And if June became a problem, she'd be buried too, just slower. In the cell, Emmett finally looked up at his daughter. "I didn't do this," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, blinking hard. "But someone out there's doing it real well." The next morning brought no clarity, only heat and silence. June Rourke stood in the middle of the abandoned barn behind her father's property. Dust covered everything. Tools hung untouched. A saddle still rested where her mother had left it years ago. As she brushed her fingers over the worn leather, a memory hit her hard. Being 8 years old, watching her father break a wild Mustang in the open field. Her mother had stood by the fence, smiling. They used to be a family, before secrets and silence grew between them like weeds. June pulled open the old filing cabinet beside the feed bins. Most drawers held junk, feed logs, invoices, vet receipts. But one folder was newer. Inside, she found a letter addressed to Emmett, marked Confidential, with the return address scratched out. It was typed, formal, and warned him that Sierra Valley Equine Holdings was placing pressure on local registrars to review his claim over Dust Devil. The letter ended with a cryptic line, "They know more than they're letting on. Watch your neighbors." Her stomach turned. This wasn't just about a horse. It was about someone trying to erase her father, slowly, methodically. Back at the sheriff's office, Deputy Travis Merle met her outside. He had that look, the kind a man gets when he's sitting on information too big to carry alone. "Found something," he said, handing her a folder. "That company, Sierra Valley, it doesn't exist. Not here. Not anywhere. It's a ghost operation. Shell accounts, fake owners, offshore filings. Somebody built a lie to steal that horse, and set your father up to take the fall." June stared at the papers, heart pounding. "And who benefits?" she asked. Travis's jaw tightened. "You already know." Meanwhile, Cole Landry sat inside his private stable, staring at a picture of Dust Devil as a yearling. The horse had been bred from a bloodline believed to have been wiped out decades ago, a genetic anomaly, a freak mix of speed, strength, and stamina. Dust Devil wasn't just rare. He was priceless. "This horse changes everything," Cole whispered. "He'll build an empire." His fingers tapped the table as he thought about June's return. He needed to move faster. If she uncovered the full history, everything would collapse. That evening, as June returned to the ranch, a familiar whinny echoed across the dry pasture. Dust Devil stood by the fence, eyes watching her every move. She stepped closer, unsure if he remembered her. But the horse took a slow, deliberate step toward her, lowering his head. The moment was quiet, fragile, like forgiveness trying to find its way through the dust. And somewhere in the tall grass beyond the fence line, someone was watching. The wind picked up that night, howling through the fence posts like a voice warning of something unseen. June Rourke sat on the porch of the old farmhouse, clutching the file Deputy Merle had given her. The moonlight made the pages look colder, more dangerous. Every line pointed to the same truth. Someone had built an entire operation just to take Dust Devil. But why go this far? Why ruin her father's name over a horse, unless the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined? Inside, Emmett remained quiet, seated at the kitchen table like a ghost in his own home. June wanted to ask him more, about Dust Devil's origins, about the people behind this mess, but there was a wall between them. Too many years of silence. Too many words unsaid. She finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me what was going on?" He looked up slowly. "Because I didn't think they'd come for me. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd leave us alone." His voice cracked. "I was wrong." The next morning, June returned to town, this time alone. She stopped by Raylene Foster's diner, not for food, but for information. The older woman, who knew everyone's business whether they liked it or not, welcomed her with a cautious smile. "Haven't seen you in years, honey," Raylene said, pouring coffee. "But I heard what happened." June leaned in. "Did my dad ever talk to anyone about losing ownership of Dust Devil?" Raylene's brow furrowed. "Only one I ever saw him argue with was Virgil Tate, about a month ago. They were out back, yelling. Something about bloodlines and papers that never should have existed." June's breath caught. That wasn't just gossip, that was motive. She left the diner without finishing her coffee and drove straight to Virgil's ranch. The place looked deserted. The gate hung open. As she stepped through the tall grass, a strange stillness settled over the land. No dogs, no cattle, just emptiness. She knocked on the door. No answer. But when she turned to leave, she noticed tire tracks, deep and fresh, heading off toward the back field. Curiosity won. She followed them on foot. What she found chilled her to the bone. A small shed hidden behind a patch of dead oaks, half buried in brush. The door wasn't locked. Inside, under a tarp, were several folders, and one had her father's name on it. Inside, original registration documents for Dust Devil, dated nearly a decade earlier, with Emmett's name erased and rewritten. Falsified. And the signature? Virgil Tate. Suddenly, a branch snapped outside. Someone knew she was there. June froze. The snap of that branch wasn't the wind. It was too close, too intentional. Her breath caught in her throat as she pressed her back against the wall of the shed, her pulse hammering in her ears. She clutched the folder tight to her chest, heart racing. Whoever was out there knew what she had just found, and they weren't here to talk. A second sound followed, the soft crunch of boots in dry grass. She peeked through the gap in the wooden slats, but all she saw was darkness and movement. Slow, careful hunting. She backed away from the door, gripping a rusty wrench from a nearby workbench. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. When the door creaked open, a silhouette filled the frame. Broad shoulders, cowboy hat low, a slow step forward. The voice was low and sharp. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Rourke." Her body tensed. It was Virgil Tate. His face was hard, older than she remembered, and his eyes held no warmth. "That paperwork's not yours. Hand it over." June didn't move. "Why'd you do it, Virgil? What was worth destroying my father's life?" He laughed bitterly. "You don't get it. Your father wasn't innocent. He knew. That horse ain't just a trophy. He's proof. Proof that your daddy lied years ago about where he got the colt. If this comes out, everyone who backed him, every deal, every buyer, goes under." His voice grew colder. "I'm protecting more than just myself, girl. You should walk away while you can." But June's eyes burned now. "He didn't lie. He raised that horse with my mother. I watched them. I was there. You forged those records because you were jealous, because Dust Devil was everything you wanted and never had." The accusation hit like a slap. Virgil took a step forward, and she raised the wrench. He paused. Tension filled the air like lightning before a storm. And then, headlights. A truck pulled up outside. Deputy Merle burst from the driver's side, gun drawn. "Step back, Tate," he shouted. Virgil didn't resist. He simply lowered his arms, his expression unreadable. "This ain't over," he muttered, backing away. June let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding as Travis rushed in and took the folder from her hands. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, still shaking. "I found what we need." Later that night, back at the station, June handed the forged documents to Sheriff Eli Banner. The old lawman studied them, jaw tight. This changes everything," he muttered. But June wasn't satisfied. "It's not just about proving my father's innocence. It's about finding out who gave Virgil the power to do this in the first place. Because someone bigger was pulling strings, and they were still out there." The morning air in Dry Ridge was thick, not with heat, but with tension. June Rourke sat at the kitchen table across from Deputy Travis Merle, the forged documents between them. The silence between sips of black coffee felt heavier than words. "Virgil didn't act alone," June said finally. "He's not smart enough to build a company that doesn't exist, file international shell accounts, and manipulate breed registries." Travis nodded. Someone with real power is behind this. And we both know who's rich enough to make that happen." They didn't say the name, but both were thinking it. Cole Landry. Travis had dug deeper overnight. The original DNA record for Dust Devil was pulled 5 months ago by a private lab in Louisiana, he explained. That test was commissioned under a company linked to Landry's agribusiness firm. And the results were sealed, like they found something they didn't want anyone to know. June leaned forward, eyes narrowing. What kind of result needs to be buried? Travis hesitated. One that proves your father owns a horse with a bloodline that was thought to be extinct. June's mind spun. Her mother had always said Dust Devil was special, not just in spirit, but in breeding. A rare strain. Something passed down through a long-forgotten line. If Landry had confirmed that, it would explain everything. Owning Dust Devil wasn't just about money anymore. It was about legacy, influence, control over the future of elite breeding in the South. If Landry gets away with this, June said, voice hard, he'll rewrite history. And my father will die a fraud in the eyes of this town. Meanwhile, in a sprawling glass office outside Baton Rouge, Cole Landry watched a recording on his phone, security footage from a camera hidden near Virgil's shed. It showed June finding the documents. His jaw clenched. "She's getting too close," he muttered. His assistant, a man in a tailored suit with cold eyes, stood by. "Want me to handle it?" Cole didn't answer at first. Then, "No. Let her think she's winning. That's when people make mistakes." He turned to the window, staring out at the horses galloping below. Besides, the auction paperwork already cleared. In 2 days, Dust Devil is mine. That afternoon, June returned to her father's cell. Emmett sat quiet as always, but when she placed the file in front of him, something in his face cracked. "You kept everything," he whispered. "They didn't destroy you." She reached through the bars and took his hand. "No, Daddy. They tried. But now we hit back." And in 2 days, they would all be standing face to face at the auction. One last time. 2 days later, the sky over Dry Ridge looked as if it were holding its breath. Clouds hung low and heavy, casting long shadows over the auction grounds. Trucks lined the dirt road, trailers gleaming, buyers gathering from across state lines. But behind the noise of commerce and chatter, something darker stirred. June Rourke stood near the edge of the arena, eyes fixed on the corral where Dust Devil paced, restless. She could feel it in her bones. Today wasn't just about clearing her father's name. It was about taking back everything they tried to steal from him. Inside the sheriff's office, Emmett Rourke stood by the barred window, breathing in the scent of horses and dust through a crack in the glass. He hadn't stood in front of a crowd in years. Not since Mary's funeral. Not since the town began whispering about him instead of greeting him. But today, he'd face them all. Sheriff Eli Banner, holding a printed court order in hand, unlocked the cell without a word. "You're free until the hearing. Don't give me a reason to regret this," he said. Emmett didn't answer. He just nodded once, the kind of nod a man gives when he's about to step into a storm. Out in the auction barn, Cole Landry adjusted his cufflinks, surrounded by handlers and lawyers. He moved like he owned the place, maybe because, in a way, he did. His name was already on the projected purchase list, cleared through forged documents and silent backdoor deals. Dust Devil was supposed to be transferred to his estate by sundown. But when Cole saw June approaching the announcer's booth with Deputy Travis Merle and a folder full of evidence, a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Not fear. Just irritation. Travis took the microphone. "Before the auction continues, we have official documents to present regarding horse number 17, known as Dust Devil." The crowd stirred. June stepped forward. "This horse was registered under fraudulent ownership. My father, Emmett Rourke, is the rightful owner, and we have proof," including forged transfers, DNA results, and signed confessions. Murmurs erupted. Faces turned. And then, the crowd parted. Emmett walked in. His boots hit the dirt with the weight of history. People stared, some in shame, some in surprise. Dust Devil neighed loudly from the pen, his ears flicking toward Emmett. Without hesitation, the stallion moved to the gate, pressing against it as if trying to reach his true owner. The moment froze the crowd. Cole tried to speak, to object, but the truth had already taken root. And some truths are louder than money. The silence that fell over the auction barn wasn't natural. It was thick, oppressive, the kind of silence that comes when truth steps into a room where lies have lived too long. Emmett Rourke stood alone in front of the crowd, the worn brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. Dust Devil stood just behind the gate, his breath steady, ears alert. Emmett hadn't spoken to most of these people in years. Now, they watched him like strangers. Some with pity. Some with guilt. Some just waiting to see if the old man would break. He didn't. His voice, when it came, was low and rough. "I've been called a liar. A thief. A forger." He paused, letting the words settle. "But the only thing I ever did wrong was trust the wrong man. And I paid for that with my name." He held up the folder June had given him. Forged papers, DNA reports, sworn statements. "Dust Devil was born on my land. Raised by my hands. He's not just a horse, he's part of my family. And you all know it." The crowd shifted, uneasy. No one dared speak. Cole Landry stood, trying to regain control. "This is an emotional stunt, not a legal claim," he said smoothly. "The auction has already cleared the transaction." "Shut your damn mouth, Cole," someone muttered from the crowd. Another voice added, louder this time, "We know what you did." The tide was turning. June stepped beside her father, fire in her eyes. "We traced the DNA test you paid to hide. We have statements from the vet you threatened. And we have one more thing." She turned to Travis, who handed over a flash drive. "Security footage of your assistant planting false registration papers." Emmett turned toward Cole, and for the first time, his voice trembled. "Not from fear, but from heartbreak. You tried to take my life from me. Not just the land, not just the horse. You tried to erase the only thing I had left of my wife." His eyes welled, but no tears fell. "I hope you never know what that kind of loss feels like." The weight of those words settled on everyone present. Suddenly, Dust Devil let out a powerful whinny, as if speaking for the man who had raised him. The stallion reared back, then landed with a thud that echoed across the barn. Everyone froze. In that instant, it was clear. This horse wasn't going with anyone but Emmett. Sheriff Banner stepped forward, his badge glinting under the lights. "Auction's over. This horse ain't for sale. Not today. Not ever." And with that, the balance of power shifted, for good. The week after the auction passed quietly in Dry Ridge. Life returned to normal. Tractors on the road, church bells on Sunday, gossip at the diner, but there was a change in the air. Emmett Rourke no longer walked with his head down. People nodded when they saw him. Some even stopped to shake his hand. The truth had come out, and with it, the weight he'd carried for years began to lift. Cole Landry had been indicted on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. His empire was unraveling. And for the first time in a long while, Emmett could breathe. Early Friday morning, Emmett stepped into the barn just as the sun broke over the hills. The air smelled like hay, old leather, and peace. Dust Devil lifted his head at the sound of boots on dirt, then walked straight toward his old friend. Emmett placed a hand on the stallion's neck, rough fingers brushing through his mane. "They tried to take you from me," he whispered. "But you knew where you belonged. The horse pressed his nose to Emmett's chest, and for a moment the world was silent, just two souls that had survived hell together. From the doorway, June Rourke watched her father and the horse, her arms folded across her chest. So many years had been lost, to pride, to grief, to silence. But now, in this still moment, something was healing. She stepped forward. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about staying a while, helping out around here, maybe rebuilding the place." Emmett turned, eyes shining. He wanted to say something wise or strong, but all that came out was, "You don't owe me that." June smiled. "I'm not doing it for you, Dad. I'm doing it for me." Back in town, Deputy Travis Merle finalized the paperwork with the district attorney. He didn't give statements to the press. No interviews, no credit. When asked why he kept pushing, he simply said, because it was the right thing to do. Later that evening, he drove past the Rourke Ranch. In the distance, he saw a dust devil running through the field, mane whipping in the wind. Free, powerful, untouchable, just like the truth. On Sunday, Emmett and June set a new rocking chair on the porch. They sat together as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting a golden glow across the pasture. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable, earned. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace. And as Dust Devil galloped in the fading light, father and daughter watched in silence. Nothing could take him now, and nothing would ever take them again. If this story moved you, give it a like and make sure to subscribe. We bring powerful, emotional stories that stay with you. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next, and share this with someone who still believes in truth and second chances.